So this topic, while yes, of course, it is IT and technology related, it's fundamental to having high growth, sustainable organizations. So when we think about business continuity, it is across everything in our organization. It's across our team, our people, our processes, our physical locations, and yes, of course, technology. So we're going to be talking about this from a technical lens, but also from your business as a whole. So why does this matter? A pretty staggering statistic that 60% of small businesses close within 6 months after a cyber attack or a disaster. So why is that number so high? I will tell you that rarely there is one thing that would cause this to happen. Businesses typically fall down after an incident because there are multiple things leading up to that. So maybe the business hasn't been strategically planning for these different incidents. Maybe there are a series of things that have gone wrong. And this incident, again, whether it's a cyber attack or some kind of natural event, it's that kind of straw that breaks the camel's back, right? But typically, even if you can recover from that, there are serious financial implications. So on average, it's $8,000 an hour every hour a business is down. And we worked with a customer recently that their number was $10,000. So, what we've seen is right in that ballpark. And really, when we think about business continuity and disaster recovery, and you're going to hear me say this again and again, it's probably going to get a little old hearing this, but it needs to kind of drilled in our minds. We need to minimize downtime. That's where this number is really important, right? So whenever we're doing our plans, we need to keep in mind in these different impact analyses that we need to do to say, okay, if X happens and takes out this part of our operation, what is that costing us per hour? Depending on what that price tag is, essentially, that loss, what do we need to invest to ensure that either that doesn't happen, we have a backup in place, for example, another vendor that we can spin up really fast, or maybe we always have 2 vendors in place, knowing that second one usually isn't needed. But man, isn't it worth that extra monthly fee to know that we have that safety net so we can use them to burst up when our key vendor has an issue, right? These are the types of decisions you can start making when you know what this number is for your organization. Another thing that is critical for us to understand and accept that it's not if something goes wrong, it's when. And I would love to be able to stand up here, especially as someone that runs a cybersecurity and IT company, to say, we can guarantee that it will never happen to you. And if I can crack that someday, I will be wildly successful and I'll let you all know. The reality of it is, you can do everything right, follow all the best practices, and a breach can still occur. The key is to minimize downtime. How fast can you detect it? And how fast can you start recovering from it? So the first is that risk assessment and prevention. So this happens far before there's an incident, but also leading up to an incident. So when you're doing your different risk analyses, when you look at your operations, look at all the different ways that you rely on a day-to-day basis to keep business running reliably. So what do you need at your physical location? What are the files that you access? What are the vendors that are providing critical services, right? What does your supply chain look like? Ask yourself these questions of, well, what does that depend on? What happens when that goes down? And when you ask the question of what does it depend on, include the obvious things like electricity, right? Internet, the things that maybe we don't think about that kind of have become invisible to us. And then we can start thinking about, well, how could I prepare for those things? And then when it comes to emergency preparedness. So when we have these different scenarios, what are the specific steps that we need to take? So in the case, for example, of a manufacturing company, let's say there's an incoming storm, it may make sense 48, 72 hours in advance of that hitting that you start to ramp down production, right? How do we position ourselves to be as strong as we can be when that event hits? Okay. So these are the types of decisions that we need to make as business leaders to say, okay, well, I'm choosing to maybe scale back in a few areas to make us stronger when something is about to hit. And clear communication, this is a piece that I think is often overlooked, both in the planning phase and also in the actual planning. The planning phase and also in the execution. Because we can always think that, well, we have a plan here. We know our roles. Of course, we'll talk to each other. Of course, we'll communicate it. But when things are happening very fast, this can go by the wayside really quickly. And as soon as information isn't shared quickly, people don't know, the right hand, what it's doing to the left, that's when things can slow down and things can get messy. To talk a little bit about, the tools in the toolkit, as I mentioned. So we're talking about business resilience as a whole, that kind of comprehensive idea, the business continuity plan, the disaster recovery plan. And oftentimes these phrases are all kind of jumbled together. How many of you have heard people kind of use these interchangeably and kind of wonder, well, are they kind of the same thing? Yeah. And they are getting at the same purpose, of course, of making us ready to adapt to things, to be resilient. But they are distinct areas. They have different purposes, but they complement each other very beautifully. So I want to take a little time to go through what each one of these things is. And again, with you understanding, okay, well, this is what a business continuity plan does. This is what a disaster recovery plan does. That will help you pinpoint how to develop this for yourself or how to actually improve on what you have today. Business resilience, this is really that overall capacity for your organization to be better able to respond when there's an issue, right? So how do you thrive through disruption? And that might sound like almost a silly thing to say, but if you think about how your business has evolved throughout the years, you will have plenty of examples of how you actually thrive through disruption, right? Whether those are macroeconomic trends that you couldn't predict, different competitors in the marketplace, maybe there's a technological advancement. It's nothing that actually is going wrong. It's just things evolving that really change the way you work or how you work with your customers. These are all things that disrupt us, right? So the more that we can look ahead and the more that we can make our organization strong today, we can start to figure out how to weather whatever might be coming down the road. And this whole idea of business resilience is really something that is part of your culture. Yes, of course, it's part of leadership. It's something to make sure you're taking time, the precious little time that you have in the day-to-day to think about, but it really weaves through your entire organization. So the areas of focus, it's about that long-term adaptability. It integrates every part of your business. So how do you manage risk, your technology, resilience, and like I said, your culture and leadership. So a couple of examples. I spoke a little bit in the last slide about learning from your disruptions, evolving, and being comfortable consistently evolving. With company culture, something that is really key to think about is change management. So that's a term that we use a lot in IT of how do we manage that in a way that's responsible, that's documented, something we can roll back if we need to. But this applies to culture and people as well. And this is really critical when you're building a resilient culture, is how do we start to develop a team that embraces change. So whenever you're going through a sizable change in your organization, something that I encourage you all to think about is basically two different things. So first is that change management piece, meaning how often are we changing? And have I given my team enough time to stabilize and adapt from the change that we just made, right? Because there can be change fatigue, right? And that's where teams start to kind of get worn down, right? When change is just so constant, they can't get almost like an even footing. So that's the first thing, just be cognizant of that. And the second one is bringing people along for the journey, right? So when a team understands why they have to change, why that's important strategically for where you're all headed together and why that's making you stronger, positioning you better for success, they're going to be much more willing to adopt that change, right? So this is all, again, part of what we need to think about as leaders when we're building that resiliency in our business. Our teams, so they're ready. They're ready to adapt and ready to do what we need to do. So now we're getting into kind of the nuts and bolts of what you need to build out to make sure you're ready for whatever could occur. So the business continuity plan is that proactive strategy. So you can see how we're really comprehensive with our concept of business resilience. We're starting to narrow in now with our strategy, our business continuity plan. And this is really about ensuring that you can operate during and after a disruption. So this is when you're thinking about all of the aspects of your business that could be affected. And the focus is, staying running and minimizing downtime. I think I need to get a t-shirt that says, minimize downtime, because that is the name of the game here, right? It's inevitable that something will happen. It's just about minimizing that downtime. So this covers everything in an organization. Your people, your processes, your technology, your physical locations, right? And yes, as we just talked about with all the different people in this room, you will need different experts to assist you with the detailed plans on how to do this. But for this business continuity plan, you will know through going over what's critical, the areas that are vulnerable or at risk and that you need to shore up. And something that I would think about with this is, there are different levels of operations, right? What is to use a product development term, your minimum viable product, your minimum viable service? What is most critical? And this is sometimes a hard question to answer because you want to do so much more, as you always do, than just the minimum amount required, right? But in the case of a disaster, you need to know what that absolute minimum is. So what is the minimum you need to deliver to abide by your contracts? What's the minimum you need to deliver to be in regulatory compliance, right? These different aspects of hey, if everything is really challenging and I've got to shut things down, what is the minimum, right? And you may, for your organization, have a few different levels, right? You might have that minimum level. You might have a level of operations that's slightly above that and one that's slightly above that. And this is all part of that continuity planning, so you can assess, and this is probably a pretty quick assessment where these plans come into place. Given the incident that's occurring, I'm going to go to operation level 1, 2, 3, right? And your team knows what that means, and you start adapting to it. So a few examples here, if you rely heavily on a physical location, maybe you need to have backup sites available. If you store data at a physical location, how do you have that ready to go to the cloud, and how can you bring that back, right? How do you maintain those vendor relationships? I talked a little bit about that in terms of, your vendor bench. Who are your backups? Maybe you have a backup identified, but the day there's an incident happening, you don't want to call them for the first time, right? You want to already have the contract in place. You want to understand their response times. You want to understand how quickly they can get things up and running for you. And with our business, we acknowledge that we have some vendors in place that we pay monthly that oftentimes we don't use. But we really like having them in place because we know when we do need to use them, they're already running, right? But that's where that impact analysis comes in and the price tag that we talked about. Making sure that, obviously, before anything happens, as part of the business continuity piece, that you have solid, reliable, clean backups. This ensures that you can retrieve information, right, from those backups. Making sure that you can get your infrastructure up and running again and minimize that downtime. So you can start to see how we're building different layers here so we can, one, make sure we understand our vulnerabilities, have our plans in place, and then have a very detailed plan on how we're going to respond. And this disaster recovery plan is that very detailed plan, right? All of our communications are mapped out, the roles of your team, you'll have an incident response team that you put into place, and this is all something that comes into play. Everybody knows what needs to happen. And a concept that I also really like everyone to think about is, especially as leaders, is to be cognizant of when you're in value creation mode versus value protection mode, right? We all want to be in the value creation mode. That's when we're growing. That's when we're building. That's when things are advancing. Value protection mode is what we shift into when we're responding to some kind of event, right? We have to just protect what we have. This isn't a time to grow. This isn't a time to develop anything new. We just have to hold on to what we've got and hope we don't lose, right, in the process. Nobody likes to be here. So when we're thinking about these plans, it almost is counterintuitive to shift into this continuity planning because you feel like you're not in value creation mode, right? You're like, why do I want to spend the next 3 days, acting like the sky is falling, being the Debbie Downer, and it is, right? It's all those things of saying, okay, well, what if this happens? What if that happens, right? I mean, these are not fun conversations to have, and you don't feel like you're moving forward. You want to do all those other things, right, that are helping you grow and bring in more revenue and growing the team. But take that time, right? Shift out of the value creation mode into the value protection mode just for a few days because it actually will be value creation, right, when you need it. So this is another concept that is critical. It's certainly a technical term that we use, but it applies to everything in your business around defense in depth. So talked about the fact that it's not going to be one thing that takes your business down. It's also not going to be one thing that saves your business either. There are going to be multiple things, right? So let's use the example of a phishing link, right? So unfortunately, these are all too common these days, and they're getting more and more sophisticated. An email comes in, it looks totally legit. Maybe we're moving a little too fast, we click on that link. Clicking on that link alone should not take your organization out, right? Because hopefully you have a few layers in place, right? You have monitoring in place that knows as soon as that link was clicked on, there's an issue, right? So that can be isolated instantaneously. That's in place, and then you have someone who can take a look at logs to make sure, okay, what actually happened here, right? We can do an analysis. And then from that, we can make sure that we haven't suffered a breach. These are all things that need to happen, these layers that are in place to, one, monitor, right? Scan the pool. Is there actually a risk here or an emergency situation? Quickly respond to isolate, right? That's the biggest thing to do, especially in an incident like that, is you isolate it, right? We have something that, puts shudders down the spine of everyone in IT of things moving laterally, right? No, we're going to isolate it. We're going to stop it in its tracks, figure out what's going on. So just like not one thing can take your organization down, not only one thing will save the organization either. So think about this concept of defense in depth. What are the different layers of monitoring, fallback, redundancy that we have in place? That's going to be really, really critical. I want to walk through a second example, and I'll open this up again to to feedback, comments, questions on this one. So in this case, we're shifting gears to talking about cyber incidents. So in this case, we've got a regional law firm, a mid-sized law firm. They have 5 offices, and our incident here is a ransomware attack. So the result of this attack, we have files encrypted, and in this case, email is disabled. So for this example, I have kind of 3 different steps here. So in the previous example, we had the business continuity plan and then the disaster recovery plan. In this one, I want to talk through kind of 2 steps of the business continuity plan, and then a 3rd step with the disaster recovery. So in this case, before the attack, we have a plan for all of this. Unfortunately, ransomware incidents are all too common. So this is something that we've looked ahead for, and we've done our risk assessment around it. And we did identify it as a top threat. So the defense in depth scenario here, right? So we have multi-layered cybersecurity. We have our endpoint protection in place. Everything is monitored 24/7. We have multi-factor authentication in place. We have our firewalls configured properly. So these are all different layers that are helping to protect us, right, if something like this occurs. We have daily backups running, and those are tested so we can make sure that, yes, indeed, it's being backed up, and yes, we can retrieve it as well. We have that incident response team assembled so they understand their roles and what they need to do if this happens. And then our cyber insurance, right? I think we're all pretty accustomed to the point at this point that we all need cyber insurance. We don't have to be a tech company to need that. And that's something that's absolutely critical to have in place. And again, just like an insurance company for your building, make sure you understand your policy and who you need to contact if something like this happens or you think there might be an incident, right? So that's many, many months, maybe a year, right, before the attack. So day of the attack. So this is, we've detected that there's something abnormal going on, right? We know that there's been an incident. That is an automated system that's in place, right? It's not a person who's looking at things. It's an automated monitoring system that isolates that. It shuts down what has been infected and starts to isolate it, right? So we don't want this to spread. We want to isolate it, shut that part of the system down, and we shift our communications, right? So in this case, we can't email each other. So our BCP has mobile communications outlined in it. So the secure app that we're using, we actually have people's mobile phone numbers. I mean, just think of it in that way. Do you have everyone's mobile phone number, right? What happens if you can't access your system? How do you reach people? This is a really simple thing, but oftentimes we're just so used to logging into Teams or Slack or whatever that might be, we never call people on their actual phones anymore, right? And we continue, in this case, since it's a law firm, we can access our encrypted files. We have those backups, and we can proceed with the most urgent, casework in their case that they have going. And in terms of continuing with those cases, this is also part of that definition of what is mission critical, right? So what is that set of work that has to continue to keep going, right? And that's all been predefined. After the attack, we also do a regroup on cybersecurity training. And this is something that we always do. Most data breaches actually happen because of human error, whether it's the case of clicking on that link or just going a little too fast, or that email is really convincing, we click on the link, or maybe it's some kind of social engineering event, right? That someone has been, or some organization has been working to kind of get into your organization, they've pieced together information, and that final bit of information was calling that receptionist and acting like they had a meeting scheduled, and they got that last bit of information, right, to log in or access something maybe even in your physical office. So training your team, when you talk about defense in depth, that training is absolutely a critical layer. It's like a stat of 88% of data breaches happen because of human error, right? So again, it's like you can be doing everything right. Sometimes it takes a mistake, right? So training. Absolutely, you want to do training after an incident, but always do training across your organization. A couple of things with a remote workforce. So the first is you can have an absolutely secure IT environment with remote work as you can in the office. So you just build it a little differently sometimes. So that is perfectly fine from a security standpoint. Now, one thing to think about when you have a distributed workforce like that with remote work, network connectivity can be a factor, right? So I'll use our business as an example. We have a couple offices, but most of our team is remote. And we make sure that they have a certain, connectivity speed, right, to be able to work from home, right, and that's reliable. So that's a requirement, right? Now at our office, we have 2 different internet providers, right? So we do have more redundancy in the office that, we can't totally expect people to have from their homes, but that's something that we accommodate for. The other thing to think about with remote work is actually you have a geographic advantage because you have people in different locations, right? Our team, we have team members in Florida on both coasts. We have team members in Maine, all across the eastern seaboard. Philippines, we're spinning up South Africa soon. We have to operate 24/7 and not just always on, we actually have to answer the phones 24/7, right? So we have these different geographic locations because that helps us to be more redundant as well, right? Hurricane hits the west coast of Florida, well, we got the east coast, we have Maine, we have all these other places. If something wacky happens and there's an earthquake in the Philippines, we have other folks, right? So this is also a big advantage of remote work. So getting started, and this might be getting started with these plans for the first time, it might be just updating them. But here are a few things that I think are really critical to think about and to focus on. So the first thing, if you haven't done so already, identify an owner in your organization. And someone made the comment earlier about, the executive assistant is the person who's, interfacing and trying to make decisions. Well, that shouldn't be your person, right, who leads this. It doesn't have to be your most technical person, but it has to be someone who understands the organization as a whole and understands the key components of your operation, right? They are going to have to bring in different members of your team to get those deep dives into each team and each part of the operation. But it needs to be someone who has that big picture look. They're excellent with collaborating, with pulling a lot of different bits of information together, and really awesome and comfortable with asking lots of questions. So this resilience mindset is all about asking questions, right? It's the what if game. And again, it's not the conversation we like having, right? The what if this happens, what if that happens, but have those conversations about the scenarios. So it's the what if scenario coupled with looking across your organization where you have those single points of failure, right? Those 2 ways of looking at this issue will help get to the point of where the risk lies. Once you identify those areas of risk, then you start doing that business impact analysis. Well, what does that cost me? If this can't run, what does that mean? Okay, well now I know how much I want to spend to make sure that doesn't happen, right? And this part about asking questions. So this is, the key to everything really is, make no assumptions. And whoever is kind of leading this plan and assessment building, ask a lot of questions like you're walking into the team or the organization for the first time. How do you do this? What are the tools that you use? How long does it take to do that? What are the vendors you rely on? Okay, you only have one there. Is there anybody else? What does that depend on? What does that depend on, right? And you just keep digging. And that will really uncover, where the red flags are. And this all comes into, reviewing your vendors, your partners. What do your contracts already allow for maybe additional capacity? If they have to do something after hours over the weekend, is there a different fee, right? What do you expect when you need different services or different timing? And then document what you have. Even if you don't have a real plan in place now, put it on paper. Just get that started, and that will also help to bring to light where you may be missing some things. And then once your plan is established, this is something that I really encourage you all to look at on a quarterly basis. Just ask yourself, what has changed in the business? Maybe on your team, there are 2 people in operations that know how to do a certain function. Maybe that quarter, one of them left, right? Well, that's now a key area of vulnerability, right? Are they cross-trained, that one person who's still there? So just start being accustomed to asking yourself those questions. What changed? What might be coming up? Is there anything else we need to think about, right? And it's super easy with our very, very busy day-to-day to do this as a check the box. Oh, we're good. We just looked at that 3 months ago. But really try, to get yourself in that mindset. This is going to be key to staying, in that business value creation mode.